today Ozgur K. Shaheen. Ozgur K. Shaheen is an award-winning historical novelist and life coach. His second book, True Colors, was released late last year as a sequel to The Wrath of the Brotherhood. He's currently working as a life coach while hunkered down during this pandemic and working on a nonfiction book on narcissism. He grew up in Minneapolis and his studies range from astrophysics and history to meditation and development studies. So welcome, Ozgur.
Hi, it's good to be here today.
Welcome.
Yeah, I am thrilled to have you here. So I'll tell you how I met Ozgur after you present our beer and we hear his first reading.
All right, so the beer for this first reading is not beer at all. The beer for this first reading is cider. Little known fact, I am all about cider. I'm almost more interested in cider than beer. And I'm particularly interested in French and Spanish ciders. So I've chosen a Spanish cider for this. Oh, you've got like a nice ice bucket.
I do.
Mayador is a delicious Spanish cider.
Oh, I thought you said you adore, but I see Mayador.
So I chose this because, you know, we're looking at Spanish colonial pirates and sailors and whatnot in the 1600s, I believe.
Yeah, it's 1660.
Yeah. So for this first reading, you know, I really was just trying to think, what would they drink? And in the Basque region of Spain, that's where the cider region of Spain. Cider is huge, and it goes way, way back. They've been making cider in the Basque region forever. So it just occurred to me that, you know, cider is probably one of the things that they're drinking. The cider houses in that region, they open up for a very short time during the cider season. They've got, it has a cork. It's a fancy bottle.
It is.
So the cider house is open. They ferment the cider in these huge wooden casks that have a chalk in them, in a hole that keeps them closed. And when you're pouring cider, you go into the cider house and you pay a flat fee. You get a meal and cider, pretty much all the cider you can drink. And when they pour the cider, somebody will yell out, I can't remember the word now, but it means chalk. And that means somebody's going to open a barrel, and everybody runs in with their glass. They pull out this pin, and cider just sprays out in this arc, and you stick your glass under it and catch it. So ideally, with the Spanish ciders, you pour them from a great height. If you watch the cider tenders in bars in that region of Spain, it's pretty amazing because they will hold the cider bottle way up here over their heads, and they'll hold the glass way down at their hip and pour like this. and hit the glass. Like an art.
So
it kind of creates, you know, it creates a little bit of, because the ciders are still, they're not carbonated, but it creates a little bit of, you know, effervescence as air gets trapped in from that agitation.
Do I have to do that here in my house? You know,
you will make a mess if you do that there in your house.
I can guarantee it.
So pour carefully, because there is schmutz. There is like yeast schmutz in the bottom. So pour carefully.
That was my question.
Yeah. Spanish ciders are really funky.
Funky in what way?
Highly acidic.
Okay.
A little bit vinegary acidic. Cheers. Sorry, we're drinking in front of you, Oscar.
Cheers.
I apologize.
That's all right. I don't drink anyway.
All right. Well, then it's all good. So they're kind of acetic, acid, kind of vinegary, a little bit barnyardy. It's the wild fermentation creates all these funky flavors. They're not for everybody.
It's a little bit like sipping a crab apple.
Yeah.
It's very kind of
A
bitter,
crab apple in vinegar.
pungent.
Well, it's almost
Yeah.
that season.
So that's what I
It takes me
chose,
getting
why I
used to
chose
it.
it. So, Oscar, what is our first reading?
All right. Well, this is, like I said, set in 1660, and the crew of this privateer ship is just about to attack. It's attacking this town, and this scene is taken from the perspective of one of the prisoners in the fort, a Dutch prisoner whose crew was tortured by the Inquisition. So I'll just get started here. Peter counted his blessings when the firing ceased, leaving the cells undamaged. He glanced around at the intact walls and bars. Well, perhaps a little damage would have been all right, he thought. It was, after all, only he and his men that needed to remain undamaged. He knew pirates and privateers often raided Rio de la Hacha due to its poor defenses, small garrison, and wealth of pearls. But when the noise of the soldiers had wakened him, he saw from his east-facing window what looked only to be a Spanish warship sailing into the harbor at night, crushing his hopes. When the soldiers' greetings turned to panic and the ship began firing on the fort, he had laughed aloud for nearly the entire attack. His men had stirred from their hopeless dread and uneasy dreams to ask what he could see, though the ship was out of view, but he could not stop laughing long enough to reply. He laughed until tears rolled down his face, and as every shock of cannon fire shook the walls, he laughed anew. It was only when the cannons fell silent that his mirth ceased, and he watched for any opportunity to escape. Unlike many fortresses, the cells in this place were on the upper floor, where only the occasional breeze banished the oppressive heat. It sounded like large sections of the north wall had collapsed, but the cells faced only east and west. With luck, these raiders would check the cells rather than simply looking for plunder or avoiding the ruined fort altogether. However, he could not rely on luck. As far as he knew, it was up to him and his men to escape in the confusion, or at least to claim some small vengeance on their captors before their inevitable executions should they be left alone to rot. Before long, he heard hurrying footsteps approach and the sound of a key turning in the lock. It was the alcaide, the tribunal's jailer, independent of the military command structure. Peter kept his hands in his pockets and directed a look of flat disdain at him. The man carried a pistol in each hand, and Peter was wary of him, as he more than likely meant to kill the prisoners in the fortress if the fortress was compromised. But he wanted the alcaide to come closer. "Going well, is it?" he asked tauntingly. He placed his left hand to rest on the bars of his cell and leaned closer. The alcaide advanced on him, pistol pointed at his chest and rage on his face. Peter was certain that his attitude was more to do with Peter showing no fear than to do with the battle. "Whatever happens here, it won't help you, Captain," he spat. "I will see to that." "No doubt you will if you can keep your hands steady enough," Peter said. "Perhaps you should call on your friend the alguacil to hold them steady for you if you're not used to such work." The alcaide's face contorted in its rage. He hated the alguacil, and Peter knew it. Whenever the alguacil became frustrated with his prisoners, he took it out on the alcaide. Just a little closer, he thought. Peter wanted to goad the man closer without receiving a pistol shot for his trouble. The alcaide took another step towards the cell, bringing him right next to the bars. He was momentarily at a loss for what to say, but he cocked a pistol, and the look on his face told that he meant his weapon to speak for him. You won't see another dawn," he said. It was all Peter could do to stand there, leaning against the bars, casually mocking the alcaide rather than bracing for a shot. But he knew Reuben was about to start making a racket in his cell, and he had to be ready. But at that moment, someone else came through the door. "Senor," said a man. Peter thought it must be a soldier, but he did not avert his gaze from the alcaide. "We must release the prisoners," said the voice. The alcaide spun around. "But you can't," he objected. "The Inquisitors—" But Peter had sprung into action as the alcaide turned his back. His right hand came out of his pocket with his belt folded up inside it, and he snaked it around the alcaide's throat, gripping the other end in his ready left hand. He pulled with all his might, and the alcaide's head slammed into the cell bars even as the soldier's words sank in. But whether or not he was to be released, he would see the alcaide dead. The Al-Qaeda's pistol discharged, causing a collective flinch among the newcomers, but the men dropped both pistols in shock and pain at the assault. Peter pulled again and again as blood flowed down the iron bars of his cell, and finally he let go, stretched his arms through the bars, and snapped the Al-Qaeda's neck. He spat on the body as it slid to the floor, then looked up, surprised to see that no one had stepped any closer to help the Al-Qaeda. Peter could see that it was a lieutenant who had entered with a corporal and some other men close behind him. "Did you see that, Corporal?" asked the lieutenant. "How he killed the Al-Qaeda before we could get to him?" "Wasn't a thing we could have done, sir," agreed the corporal. Of course, Peter thought. The Al-Qaeda had hated the Alguacil for exactly the same reason the soldiers hated the Al-Qaeda. When he was frustrated, he took it out on them. Nothing so irked soldiers like taking orders from a civilian who had virtually no power, yet who could still give them orders and antagonize them without fear of retribution. Peter and the large Negro standing behind the lieutenant laughed at the same time, and Peter shifted his attention to these other men who had come to his cell. His heart leapt. These must be the raiders, he thought. They even had a small native woman with them, and Peter would have assumed that she was just a local guide had she not been armed as heavily as any of them. "If you wouldn't mind putting your belt back on, sir, I'll let you out," said the corporal. "Only I'd hate to get strangled with it, or worse, for your pants to fall down. You understand."
So the background of meeting Oscar, we actually met, about maybe 5 years ago at Rain Taxi. When, do you happen to know, was it 2015? I'm thinking it must have. I had a booth there for Gabriel's Horn, and you were passing out business cards when you still had just an ebook.
I believe it was 2014, because 2015, yeah, 2015 was the year that I got hardcovers.
Okay, so yeah, we met then, and we've, I think, pretty much been friends ever since. So we have been on, I don't know, 2 or 3 panels at various conventions like MarsCon and ValleyCon, maybe just 2. But one of those panels, it was you, me, and I know her name, Melissa. No,
Yeah.
she goes by, what's her name?
Well,
Ivory.
her pseudonym is
Ivory
Ivory Kirk, yes.
Right. Okay. So, on one of these panels, we talked about humor and writing. So I find that kind of ironic because your book, in a lot of ways, it's not a comedy.
No.
But I love this. I love the 2 guys just standing back. "Oh no. Did you see how he killed him? And we couldn't do a thing to stop him." Yeah, why, yes, sir. What a shame. So,
well, I deliberately,
yeah.
well, I realized my first book did not have a lot of humor in it, and these are basically pirates. I mean, they're legal pirates, but they're pirates. And most people seem to think I'm funny, and I thought, why am I not putting this in my books? And it just wasn't how I wrote. And I thought, okay, I need to try to put a little more humor in book 2. And so this is a reading. These are all readings from book 2. And
really? Okay.
Yeah.
I did not realize that. And see, it's a good thing I didn't lie and say I finished book 1. Then I would have been caught in my own lie.
You've been like, wait, where was this scene?
Yeah, well, I know we meet Coya, who's coming up in the next reading very, very early in book 1. So I just assumed that reading was from book 1. So, now there are some eras like World War II, the Civil War, Revolutionary War, a little bit, that, or like the jazz era, the 30s, the 20s, that writers just hit over and over, and readers never seem to get tired of. But you picked a rather unusual era at 1660, and we don't get a whole lot. I mean, apart from Pirates of the Caribbean, we don't get a lot of pirate stories. So what drew you to 1660?
Well, there are a couple of answers to that, and even Pirates of the Caribbean is set in the 18th century, like early-ish, early to mid 18th century. And the complex answer is that it's a great time period for, like, there's enough civilization in the New World for there to be structure, like infrastructure, for there to be like norms, but there's enough wilderness there's still enough wilderness for there to be a lot of possibility for adventure. It's still a frontier. It's still largely uncivilized, unpopulated. And I've always been sort of more fascinated by the pre-American period of colonialism. But then there's an easier answer, which is that I grew up playing Sid Meier's Pirates video game, and the default was always 1660.
Oh, interesting.
Like
Okay.
you could pick your time period.
So, yeah. Okay, well, that is really interesting. And so that answers why pirates, too. So you have a pretty varied background. You've had multiple sorts of careers and jobs. You want to tell me about some of them and interests?
Sure. Well, when I was in high school,
Exactly, right? Yeah.
when I was in high school, I wanted to go into astrophysics. Oh, sorry, I missed that.
And you studied it for a while.
Yeah, I went to Boston U for astrophysics and then came back to the U of M for astrophysics. And then I got burnt out and quit because all of my calculus teachers were sort of that variety where they don't explain how calculus works. They just want you to memorize, memorize, memorize. And after a while, you just feel like you don't know what you're doing unless you get it on your own. And I sort of checked out. I didn't have much of a social life, and I sort of thought this isn't for me. And I decided I wanted to be a writer, mostly a fiction writer. And I didn't pursue that regularly, as most artists know, until you set a schedule. If you do everything by when you feel like it, you're never going to get anything done.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, then in about 2001. I got really heavy into consciousness development. I sort of stumbled on that field, and I thought this is a much more fulfilling kind of answer seeking than astrophysics was. And I got into working on some nonfiction too. And eventually I thought, I'm working on too many things at once. I need to pick one, stick with it, finish it. And that I decided, because of the timing of Pirates of the Caribbean, maybe it was good to sort of pick that genre.
Yeah, it's a great choice. I'm really enjoying the book, and we are ready for beer number 2.
Wow, that was fast. How do we get ready for beer number 2 already?
Yeah,
already.
Yep.
This next reading is from the point of view of an indigenous woman. From Inca.
Yeah, she's like twice over a refugee from the Incan Empire. Like the Incas were basically wiped out 150 years before. Yeah. And the story is that she and her people were one of the tribes that fled that area, fled the downfall. And then later on, early in her life, her town was raided by more Spaniards expanding into their territory. So she's like a twice over refugee from her own people.
Got it. But so it is from her point of view, from an excuse me, Central American indigenous person. So I was thinking, what is the indigenous alcoholic drink? And that would be chicha, which is made by chewing corn, and the saliva works like the enzymes in barley malt and breaks down the starch of the corn kernels into simpler sugars that are then fermented naturally, spontaneously fermented. You're not going to find chicha anywhere unless you go to Central America. They still make chicha there.
I've been offered it.
Yeah, I would love to try it. I would love to try it. The only place you might find it here, so Dogfish Head has this famous, Sam Calagione, the owner of Dogfish Head, did this series, and in one of the episodes, they made chicha. So he had everybody in their office like chewing corn kernels obsessively. But other than that, you're not going to find chicha anywhere. So I was thinking, well, what's like chicha? Nothing's like chicha. But how can I get at chicha? How can I hint at chicha? So I chose a cream ale. So I have Cowbell Cream Ale from Urban Growler Brewery in Minneapolis. Oh, they're in St. Paul, actually. I'm sorry. They're just across the city limit in St. Paul. So a cream ale, it's also a New World invention. Cream ale was invented in the late 19th century in the US when there were still ale brewers before the lager brewers completely took over. But the lager brewers were here and the ale brewers needed something to compete with their pale lagers. So basically they took an American style lager and fermented it with ale yeast. And that's kind of the origin of cream ale. But an important part of that, both American lagers and cream ale, is that it uses a large percentage of corn in the grist, in the grain bill. So that's why I gravitated to cream ale in an attempt to hint at chicha. I don't know that you'll like this, Laura. Maybe you will. It's really
We'll
simple,
see.
straightforward.
Cheers.
Enjoy.
This has a really strong smell. I could smell it before it near me. You don't smell that? It usually doesn't jump out at me like that.
It doesn't have that strong a taste.
I can't smell anything.
Here, let me hold it closer. You'll know.
No.
Simple,
Yeah.
straightforward. Cream ale
I
is an
try.
extraordinary light beer. Nothing that taxes your palate or anything. It's like an American lager with ale yeast. Is really what it is.
It's okay. I probably wouldn't make a great effort to buy it again, but I don't hate it. So
It's great on a summer day.
yeah, I can see that.
Hot days like we've had in the last few days.
Yeah, we've had a couple hot days. Mostly I've been inside and I haven't noticed, but I did go out today, as you know. So what do we have for reading number 2, Oscar?
Well, reading number 2 is after this raid on the town. The crew raided the Inquisition's vaults, and they found this sort of old Inca relic. It's about the size of a scepter made of solid gold, as much as you can make anything out of